Morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Any apologies? Just in minutes of the previous meeting. Are they all correct? All agree? Yeah. Any declaration of interest? This is broadcast live. Before we start on the agenda item, can I just introduce Carol Tague? She's the governance officer. She's second week, so she's sitting in, getting an idea what we're all about. Welcome. Can I pass it on to Jane Lockwood for agenda item number 4, please? Thank you.
Morning, my name is Jane Lockwood. I'm the head of procurement. So I've been asked to come here this morning and provide an update in reference to the transformation procurement project in particular. So this item came to scrutiny last December. So this is to give you an update of the activities that have happened since then, and also to ask you to comment on the report, and particularly ask you for your input around sort of measures of success and what does good procurement look like for a scrutiny panel perspective. Okay, so since December, we have concluded our activity with Deloitte, our transformation partner. So they were supporting the project. That was a time-limited piece of activity for this particular project. So just a reminder of what they were here to do with us. So they were here for 3 particular activities. The first one was around data visibility and understanding our spend. The second one was around looking for particular opportunities to make some rapid savings. So looking at the data and then analysing that and working with the council to see where could we make some immediate savings. And then sort of the final piece, but the real key piece in this, is starting to develop that work around the operating model. So what should procurement look like in Kirklees? How should it operate? What changes do we need to make? So just a reminder of the broader aims of the project. They still remain relevant to us. So they were around challenging and redefining how we procure goods, works and services across the council, making sure that all our third-party spend is necessary and that we spend it very wisely. And then our more ambitious ones around how we support local economic growth through local spend, and then also how we assess those changes in the commissioning and procurement cycle and how we can stimulate some more social value and contribute to good growth in the Kirklees area and the wider areas. Okay, so just taking you through the paper then. In terms of the category optimisation savings, so just to kind of reinforce, this is for this particular project. So we work with the transformation partner within a specific period of time. They did some long listing around potential savings. This was then brought down to 6 areas where we thought some savings could be achieved. And a figure was attributed to that, which was £6.5 million to be achieved by the end of financial year 1920. Okay, so those 6 categories were temporary staff, IT, facilities management, professional service, travel and transport, and children's services. So the figure originated from the transformation partner, and that's something that we work with them and we track and monitor on a particular sort of benefits tracker. I'll kind of come to where we're at in the next section. So in terms of the operating model, we were at the stage of signing off the model that we thought would deliver the most benefits for the council when I was last at Scrutiny. So in terms of where we're at currently, I'll come to that bit in a minute, okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so in terms of the savings, the benefits tracker, so our current position as at July 2018 shows that actually we're making significant progress in terms of savings. So we've achieved 5.6, and if you remember that initial figure of 6.5 for the whole duration. So this is largely attributable to the temporary staff. So I need to point out an error in the report, a figure error. Okay, so I'll just take you through it. So this is mostly for temporary staff. We started measuring in December onwards. We're only at the stage of starting to implement the model, so we didn't anticipate a whole host of savings other than temporary staff at this particular moment in time. So in terms of the things that we did around temporary staff, so that was reviewing the pay scales, so looking at our contract spend and looking at how we pay staff and making sure that there was parity amongst that. So paying temporary staff what we pay our own staff for the job roles. So there was some significant changes in the system to bring that in place. That is delivering a modest saving, but more than that, it's more around parity about how we pay workers. We've done some focused efforts with colleagues in HR, also with colleagues in children's. So children's have historically continued to be the largest spenders with temporary staff, both off-contract and on-contract. So we really put our effort into minimising the off-contract spend and also bringing new spend through the contract. So if people were accessing particular types of workers that they thought they couldn't get from our existing contract, we then brought that supplier in and did some work around that. So we brought some engineering type activities back into contract spend, also introduced a new group which was executive temporary staff as well, which was quite common amongst sort of the social care platform. So you can see really fantastic progress in terms of reducing that dependency on temporary staff. So with the off-contract, it's 2.95 million, and this is where the error is. On the contract spend, it says 1.31. That figure is actually 2.5. So we monitored them quite closely together because we wondered if we started reducing off-contract, there might be an impact on contract, especially as we bring in more categories in. But as you can see, it's heading in the right direction. Still more work to be done, and it will be an ongoing story. So the other savings, really a little bit small fry at this stage, but that's anticipated. There were some savings in the IT category where we've done some renegotiation, and then working with the transformation partner, we managed to discover some savings in the transactional area, in the HD1 area, in terms of the invoice processing and potential duplicate payments. So we used a particular tool which delivered over financial year 15-16 and 16-17 £40,000 worth of benefits back to us. Okay, so that's a story on how we're doing with the particular project and the savings. So I have used the word savings and or reductions in spend. So I think really what I'm trying to say to you, these are savings as a result of reducing spend. But I'm not saying that the baseline was the best baseline in the beginning. I'm just saying that actually we're making some inroads in terms of the temporary staff category. In terms of the operating model, so this year we've done some more engagement with service areas around the model. So we've agreed the model in principle, and then we've had to talk to service areas about, so what does that look like in terms of resource in your area? And we used existing data around current staff that had been identified to be working in those areas, and also looked at how much they were spending in each of those particular areas, the complexity of the market, the visibility of the contracts, so what we knew and also what we didn't know. So we agreed a resource in April with services, and we went back through the governance process to get approval to proceed and start implementation. So through April and May, one of the big things that arose out of the data visibility piece of work was actually we didn't have a full view of our contracts, and that's a really critical piece for us going forward. So we spent a significant amount of time trying to cleanse our contracts register and to gather as much data around that as possible, using other areas like GDPR, etc., to do a bit of an amnesty around, so what contracts do you have in place? So still work in progress, but a significantly more comprehensive contracts register is available. This is available openly. We have an internal and external one. They used to look different, now they both look exactly the same, and we've put measurements in place to make sure that that continues, so that any supplier or any member of public can see what contracts we've got, when they're coming up, etc. Okay, so we undertook some recruitment in June for the strategic category manager posts. So there were 6 posts in total. We have filled 5. We still have 1 to fill, and those folks will start in their new roles in September, 1st of September onwards. And then another key piece of work that's been happening between March and July is really trying to sort of generate further engagement with the organisation around changes to procurement and how the procurement operating model should work. So we did a number of key sessions around those. We invited what we thought were experts who did a great job to help us with that conversation. An open invite went out to all heads of service to encourage them to come to the sessions, to do some input and challenge with us in terms of helping shape what the model looks like. We probably had about 15 to 20 delegates per session attending. Mostly a good coverage. Where we noticed there were some key areas missing, then we would have a conversation and then do the engagement at their team meetings, etc. So some sort of in-the-room engagement, but that also followed on with services asking us to come and do a piece so they can understand the impact and the opportunities and the challenges in their areas more specifically. So the topics we covered were around strategic category management, really trying to think about, so we know the theory of it, but what does good look like here in Kirklees, but also trying to uncover what's going on already, any areas of good practice, or any things that we might want to avoid in the future. So we talked about measures of success before we talked about data deliberately. We wanted to be sort of really ambitious about what does good look like, and really generate some thinking without thinking about potential barriers about how we access that data, etc. So that was a great session, and we were joined by colleagues from performance and intelligence to help shape that discussion. We then did a piece around procurement data and information, so trying to get people to think about data in its widest sense, so not just the Kirklees data, but thinking about how we access information around the supplier markets, in particular categories, and how we connect with others to understand what they're doing well, what they're not doing well. And we were joined by colleagues in HD1 for that, so that was great. And then we combined a couple of the sessions, so we did initially we had a supplier relationship management and managing risks as separate sessions, but when we looked at the content we decided that they worked really nicely together. So audit joined us for that in Martin Durnley in terms of the risk element, and some discussions around there in terms of so with the refreshed approach to risk, how will this work in the new operating model? So we have a final engagement session in the headlines, which is around social value, which we will do at a later stage once we've got some findings on our baseline activity. Okay. So the next piece, I just wanted to update you around social value. When I was here last in December, I was asked to bring a little bit more information around that, and obviously it's a key link to our overarching aims of the project. So with me today is David Bundy from the policy team. So David and I are kind of working hand in hand in this particular activity, so on the policy side and on the practice side. So social value is far wider than procurement, as we know, but for the update today we're focusing predominantly on the procurement aspects. So we've done some significant work since we were last here, really following on the previous work from the policy committee as well. So we've engaged with CLES. So we went through a procurement process. CLES was successful, and they have been working with us just for a couple of months or so to start to sort of uncover that baseline activity. So we have done the initial sharing of our data in terms of our top 300 spend. We've met with Claire's last week to start talking about the gap analysis. So by the end of next week, we will have concluded our actions around that. So what we're looking at here is in our top 300 where they're not Kirklees postcodes, just really checking around. Okay, so the postcode might not be Kirklees, but is there a base in Kirklees here? So just doing some ratifying of that, but then looking at what is it throwing up? So are we spending a lot on particular areas where if we thought about approaching something very differently, we might have a different outcome? So something like catering, food, something like that, where our spend might be going outside of Kirklees, but there may be different opportunities for us should we wish to take that. But as I said, the findings aren't in, that's kind of just hot off the press kind of activity. So we anticipate that we'll have the findings September, October. Alongside that, there were a couple of other activities. One was an employee survey, and then one was a supplier survey. So our top 300 suppliers got a survey, and we had a number of different questions. We asked them about their supply chains and things like that. So all pieces of the jigsaw will come back together, and we'll have some recommendations in there from Claire's, but obviously then we need to think about how we take them forward and which ones we take forward first. Okay, so the other activity that's also been going on, that's part of that is some broader conversations at West Yorkshire and York level around inclusive growth, of which social value is a key part of that.
Sorry, Jane, can I just, before you move on to that, David, do you want to add anything on the social value side of it?
Not in detail. I guess the only thing I've mentioned is that we also undertook a workshop at Anchor institutions as well earlier in July. So I think part of the programme, which is, as Jane says, not finished yet, is not only to look at what the council's doing, but to look wider at what the university, police, fire, etc., health sector is doing about their work on social value. So I think to take an anchor approach to this is going to be a more collective way of working that will hopefully benefit Kirklees district is more. But again, that piece of work will be part of the report when the recommendations come back. Thank you.
Just to confirm that the social value aspect, I think, is overlapping with another scrutiny panel. So we kind of, it's between the two of us. Jane, thanks.
Yeah, so this is just the bits in relation to the procurement project, yeah, okay. Okay, so the other activity was the West Yorkshire and York piece of work. So this is not for Leeds City Region to set the direction or anything like that. This was just about us all getting together, talking through where we're at with social value in particular. And the focus of this was more around, it's really confusing for suppliers to do business with us, and social value isn't a language that's easily understood or an ask that's easily understood. So this was, as a region, do we have some broad principles that we are signed up to, and can we talk to the market in a way that they understand what we need so we get better outcomes for that? So this is quite early work, but it's in setting that context, which is the bit that I kind of wanted to get across today. So some overarching principles which none of us disagree with, but policy is set at a local level, not within that group. And this was more about, let's just make it easier to do business with us. Okay, so really a really important piece for the procurement team is, what does good procurement look like? And historically, we've probably not had measurements around this, or we might have tried to demonstrate some value and probably argued the toss around the figures that we're quoting. So what we really wanted to do was just to get a true feel of what does good look like, so that we can set a baseline, be much more visible and transparent about the added value that procurement brings. It won't be a saving every time, that's not the right reason. This is about value for money and understanding the markets and that kind of thing. But I really wanted to get a feel and an input from Scrutiny as we start to kind of finalise what our measures will be around a true feel of, if I come back in a year's time, what would you expect to see from me in terms of measurements, and what does good look like to you?
Thank you, Jane. First thing, I just want to say thank you for coming, and I'm slightly disappointed that Julie's not here. That as a service director, lead individual on this one, there's a number of things that needed to be answered. From Scrutiny point of view, we are looking at the saving, and the value aspect comes into it. Before I go into it, can I open it up to the panel members? John.
Thank you, Chair. Quite a lot of questions, to be honest. And I find reports like this frustrate me because there isn't enough detail. And if we're going to scrutinise an area, we have to be given information. You can't scrutinise an area if you don't have any information to scrutinise with. And I think I've made that at previous scrutiny panel messages. So can we try and get that message back? We want to see some detail so we can actually ask questions around it. If you produce reports like this for us, it's very, very difficult for us to actually get underneath it because we haven't got anything to look at or talk about. If I can start with the savings. So you said earlier that the 6.5 million was the target that was set in conjunction with the partners, and that you've got a benefit tracker that bases that. So presumably when that target was agreed, we had an understanding of how that was broken down across the different areas, and also when we anticipated that we would receive those savings, both across the different categories and across the timeline. What I want to see is where are we in comparison with that original proposal? Because what my expectation would be is if we've found that we've delivered some savings earlier than were anticipated, we should be being more ambitious about the target that we're setting. And I don't see that ambition coming through here, and I haven't heard anything that says we recognise and acknowledge that we're going to over-deliver. And my worry is, if you have a target and you leave that target and you know it's an easy target to hit because of your early additional savings, people take their foot off the pedal. So I'd appreciate, there's a number of questions, but I'd appreciate a response on that. And next time you come, I would like to see that benefit tracker so we can see the detail and then we can ask questions around the detail, because the information we're given here doesn't give us the opportunity to do any of that. I also am a little disappointed that we've been running engagement sessions on procurement that councillors haven't been engaged. Because I thought what the council was trying to do was trying to put councillors at the heart of everything we do. And it's really disappointing to see yet again we've got an example of where there's a council-wide engagement session and councillors have been excluded from it. So there's obviously an opportunity there that we could have contributed. And again, that's not the first time I've made that comment at these sessions either. So I am getting a little disappointed that people are coming to these scrutiny sessions, we're making points, and then we come to the next one and exactly the same thing happens. So I'm a bit grumpy about that, if I'm honest. When we start to look at, and I accept that the social value element is really difficult, and I worry when we talk about we're going to look at postcodes to look at spend and what's within our boundaries and what's outside our boundaries, because it ain't that simple. And I'd like to see more and understand more, and maybe next time you come back, David, about you can have a company that is based within Kirklees and the employees live outside, or you can have a company that's based outside Kirklees and the employees live inside Kirklees. How are we defining the societal benefit for those companies? Because really what we're interested in is spend inside Kirklees, not that their head office is based here. You could have a head office based in London, but they're working locally, and they may not have a base locally. So I think there's a danger we'll do this at a superficial level, and we'll convince ourselves that we're doing really, really well, but actually we haven't looked at the detail, enough detail. And I think what I'd also like to see, when we've talked about the social value principles, don't disagree with any of them, don't disagree with any of the words in there, but they are just words. I don't see anything that says the how. How will we measure it? You know, we've got some words that, if I take thriving communities and reduced inequalities, and it says inclusion and reduced inequalities. Well, they're nice words, but what does that actually mean? What are we doing? How will we evidence that? What is the measure that we're putting in place to target? This is the sort of detail I'm expecting to see at these sessions so that we can ask questions and scrutinise. So this is far too high level for us to really engage with at this point. And I think we'd like to see some feedback on what the responses were. So, you know, you've talked, and I've mentioned about doing these engagement sessions. Well, it doesn't tell us anything in here about what people's views were, what were the challenges that came forward, what were the risks that were associated with it, what were the opportunities, the ideas that people brought forward. There's no examples even in here that shows what good looks like. And, you know, I always look for examples because that's the best way to get across a message rather than a lot of words. If you can show an example of this is what we did and this is what it delivered, it helps everybody understand better what you're trying to achieve. There's none of that in here. I mean, I'll shut up for a minute now and let other people come in, but I may come back again.
Jane, do you want to come in?
Okay, so you asked for a response on savings. Okay, so apologies, I could have included the tracker, but given that the spend was on temporary staff, I thought I'm showing you lots of empty boxes, but I can share that with you, no problem. So the initial target was set by the transformation partner, and it was an indicative target. So they, at the point of setting it, we weren't able to detail exactly in each particular area. So what we did was we set some low, medium, high scenarios, and one of the areas we weren't able to set a target in the time that we worked with Deloitte. So this particular tracker is something that we use on an ongoing basis with the transformation partner. So we are hugely ambitious. So because we've got to 5.6 now, of course we're not going to stop at 6.5. The savings were just profiled standardly across the years. So fundamentally we probably weren't comfortable with that because that's not how savings are delivered. So we're just, for us, it's a really important piece of work to baseline and to monitor, and then we will be as progressive as we can and ambitious as we can. So apologies for not making that clearer.
Jane, before I bring John back in, you know when you said transformational partner, this is going live, and a lot of people wouldn't understand. So do you want to clarify that? And then, John, do you want to come back after that?
Okay, so this particular project was undertaken with the transformation partner, which is Deloitte, for this particular project.
Yeah, I accept it was an indicative target, but it was an indicative target, and Eamon's here, which presumably was used in our budgets. So it might have been an indicative target, but it's actually a hard number. What I'm looking for, obviously the council is challenged in terms of its budgets that are stretched. So I want to know what you're saying your target is now, because we ought to be incorporating that into our financial planning. So we can't just say we're going to be as ambitious as we can and hopefully we'll over-deliver at some point. We need to be saying, if you're profiling, you should know. So if you've got your benefit tracker that's profiled out over the next couple of years, you know what your ambition is, you know what you're setting your target at, and we should be nailing that down and incorporating that into our financial budget. So I don't know whether anyone wants to comment on that, so that you can bring it back and show it to us. So I'm not satisfied to hear just that we're going to be ambitious. I want to see hard numbers in budgets that people are accountable to delivering.
Yes. I'll pick up on that point because it ties in neatly with the financial management update as well in terms of some of the preparatory work for the budget strategy update. You're absolutely right. The Council is faced, or continues to face, a tight financial envelope and should be looking at all opportunities and building on the work today in terms of broader transformation and things like procurement. And we will be looking at that quite closely as part of forthcoming proposals, and we'll certainly highlight that as part of our budget strategy review in terms of what further targets we can look at going forward. And where we can build that success and actually stretch targets, because we do need to in certain areas. We need to push the envelope. So yeah, absolutely concur with your comments on that one. Okay.
Any further questions? Philip.
I have two questions, if that's possible, Chair. First of is that you've got now 6 posts agreed for category managers, okay. You've had engagement with service managers and directors. Some of those may have more detailed understanding and knowledge of the market they're working in than perhaps your category managers, and I hope that's been taken on board. And the other thing is, I suppose, at a high level, is looking at over a year on year a return on investment in those posts in terms of savings in procurement directly achieved by them. So that's my first one. The second one is the risk management thing in terms of procurement, in terms of contracts with particularly service providers, knowing that the central government seems to have had 1 or 2 unfortunate episodes in terms of that, and making sure that there's a detailed analysis and a clear indication of risk on a risk register.
Okay, thank you. So yes, absolutely, fundamentally, the new strategic category managers will continue to work with, develop the relationships with the commissioners, with the operational contacts, with the heads of service. So whoever is the expert and has the technical knowledge, this is all part and parcel of the new operating model. I totally agree with you about the return on investment. So we are investing heavily in procurement, so we need to know it's making a difference, which is why we are focusing heavily on measures of success and wanting to engage around that, and have been talking to Eamon and other folks around how we be very visible and transparent and clear about the benefits, or if there are issues, then we'll have a look at that again. So absolutely. The risk piece, yes, there's been a lot happening recently. So we're working with Martin Durnley. We're part of his risk panel. The new category managers will focus much more strongly on risk than we have done before. So risk isn't always the biggest spender. It's sometimes, it can be a little one. So we'll have a very, very clear focus on that. It's not that we're not accepting risk, it's just that we're much more aware of it and we're managing it. And also we're tapped in nationally. We're doing some stuff around strategic supplier relationship management, so just to try and avoid some of those Carillion type activities, where at a national level we've started to look at all our spend and pull out the top. We've had to start with top 10 spenders in this occurrence, and started having very high-level conversations with those organisations in terms of how we're managing risk, etc. We've had a potential risky situation since Carillion, which we got an early heads up from a national level, and we put plans in place. And I'm happy to say that one subsided. I know there will be many more, but risk is a key element of what we'll do in the future.
Thank you for that. I think it might be helpful for scrutiny to have an indication of where the risks are sort of medium to high, so that we can see what actions are being taken to mitigate those.
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
James, I was going to ask you my question. No, carry on, James.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to ask a couple of things. Firstly, about the operating model for procurement. So I can see what you're looking to achieve, and I can see how, from a savings perspective, that can be successful. I just wanted to understand whether you thought or you've seen any issues in terms of impacts that can have on services and how they're delivered quickly, because I think obviously one of the things about being sort of devolved and reactive is that you can potentially do things more quickly than you can when you're going through a kind of more what sounds like a more kind of bureaucratic process. An example was that, you know, the other day I was speaking to somebody in, I think it's the environmental enforcement team, and they were talking about procurement, for example, of enforcement cameras for fly tipping, and they were saying actually they are going through the process to look at that, but it's quite a lengthy process, and there's quite a lot of things that they need to do because they don't have their kind of own budget in that sense anymore to pay for that. So that was just, I just wondered whether this process is actually, whilst it might be saving us money, is there any impact on delivery of how the areas within the council deliver things that they're trying to make happen. And the other thing I just wanted to touch on was just in terms of the social value stuff. I noticed about the anchor organisations, and that's fine. I was just going to say, but within that, from a social value perspective, we also, how do we focus also on smaller organisations and social enterprises, for example, because those are quite often the ones that really have an impact in very localised areas, and especially in potentially more deprived areas, in terms of, certainly in my area, creating jobs in areas where there isn't, where there is a lack of employment opportunities for people. So I just wondered how that would feed into that, and we'd be careful not just to have kind of a couple of big anchor organisations and not focus on some of those smaller, more local organisations as well in terms of procurement.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and one that's in view. We are engaging with the voluntary and community sector over this issue and others. For example, if the anchor institution work and the work with the council creates more demand, then obviously that's going to need to be met by more local capacity in the way you've alluded to. Yeah? So we had a meeting only last week with third sector leaders, and to talk about the possibility of the next phase after the recommendations in the first report about growing that sector in terms of community businesses and cooperatives. Yeah? So I think that needs to be looked at in more detail moving forward, and that could well be part of the recommendations in that report that comes back. Okay.
So just to follow on from that particular activity, that's where the new operating model can really help as well, because we've got folks that are becoming more specialist in particular categories, so they're understanding the market better. And one of the things in terms of expectations is they generate much more interest, dialogue and competition locally. So whilst we have a procurement portal and a link to a hub, we know that many of the smaller organisations might not choose to look there, so we'll do a lot more research pre-procurement stage and dialogue just to generate some interest. So that's something that we acknowledge and are continuing to work on. In terms of the comment around the devolved kind of centralised kind of state, I totally take your point. We're trying to find a balance, so a balance of having folks that are procurement specialists, that are market specialists, but are connected in the service areas. So all of the new staff, I don't see them all the time. They're out in the service areas, getting to know people, understand the business, and so they can respond locally and pick up what's going on in an office environment as well. So whilst we probably are in a perfect state, that's something that we'll continue to look at and keep an eye on.
Jane, just to come back on what James has said earlier, when you look at engaging with individuals, when it comes to the whole process of procurement, you've got some companies are very, very good, and the whole purpose in some, the individuals are set there to get the contracts. Others, they feel it's a nightmare to jump all the hoops and all the rest of it. So have you, or is there been a process or as a tradition where we engage, trying to get local residents, businesses involved in how the process works? Have we gone through that stage? Have we had where, I think John mentioned earlier, where the engagement process, where elected members can have input in that? And I don't think you came back to that. Is some of the stuff that which is ongoing, engagements, is there any way, or is there on the table that where members can actually have an input in this? One of the biggest issues that we have, what we hear on a regular basis, is when it comes to contracts, the good and the bad examples. You've got, I think I've used examples in the past, and it's not myself, other members have expressed exactly the same thing, that for a simple contract, you've got management fees, which is a huge chunk, because you've got different aspects of the contract being delivered. That management can be done in-house. It's simply a case of who's going to go when, where, and everything in timely place. Second, the huge cost on that, on simple putting a fence up, is probably about £15,000-20,000. Putting a pelican crossing is about £60,000. That's a huge amount. When you look at the breakdown, can we collectively put the legal aspect together and then actually look at the management, because that's where the bulk of the contract's going in. Who's going to manage that? We've got an opportunity. We can have it in-house, save money, because that's what it boils down to, saving money and the value side of it. And I think you mentioned it's not about, sometimes about the saving, it's about the value. Right now, if you ask any member of the public, given the figures that we're talking about, that's not value. That's just ridiculous.
Okay, so in response to engagement, absolutely, I would welcome that. Happy to do that. Apologies that I haven't done that before. I'll rectify that. In terms of engagement with the market, so we do that already. So we do meet the buyer sessions, but really where the bulk of the activity is when we are getting ready to do a procurement. So we will do some pre-market engagement. We will try and connect locally. We'll do some desktop research in terms of local organisations if we haven't had a good level of interest, and generate some dialogue in the room. So one will be around furniture. We are due to go out shortly around that, and we had a great response to that. Also PPE and workwear. I think we had 70 folks in the room to listen about our future plans, and also to give us some in-the-moment check and challenge about what we thought we wanted, where the market had moved, that kind of stuff. So there is ongoing good level of engagement. Yes, there probably is room for improvement. I think the area where we could do more that we haven't is support around bidding for contracts is probably a bit of a weak spot, so we have to do some thinking and activity around that. So I can't comment on offence or without the data or knowledge around that, but not every procurement is lengthy or takes forever, or you need to write a myriad of responses. We try to be as proportionate and as pragmatic as possible. Yes, we fundamentally do, for those larger or riskier contracts, need more controls and process in there, but we try and we will continue to try and be a bit more pragmatic about the process needs to be relevant to what we're buying and the risk and the value, etc.
Jane, I really appreciate you coming. This is some of these questions was asked at the briefing that I had with yourself and Julie. That's why I'm disappointed. These questions need to be answered. I didn't get any answers at the briefing session, and I was told I'm going to get examples. I mentioned some of the examples would get at least one or two good examples. We've not had that. So I think from a scrutiny point, we certainly do need to kind of send a message to Service Director on this. I'm disappointed. And I'm getting nods from the panel, they're disappointed because the idea of having this is an ongoing from the previous sessions we've had. And we're back to square one again. We've not, the idea of scrutiny is to cover certain aspects, to look at not just the saving, but the broader range. And we've not done that. The report which has been given, it is on a strategic level. There's a lot of bits missing, and we kind of seem to go around. I am frustrated on this. Rachel.
I just want to come in on the engagement bit, but I'll also just make a point about the report. I think a number of you have been involved in some workshops that have been run as part of the Democracy Commission work in terms of putting councillors at the heart of the organisation. We've got the findings from those workshops, actually, because we've obviously run them with both officers and members and together. What's come out as very strong themes from that engagement is very much about how both officers and members want to work better together, and it's how we create the circumstances for that to happen. So Carl Whistlecraft and the team are on with working out a programme of how we can engage properly. I mean, we're not going to get it right straight away, and I actually think sometimes it's almost giving people the permission to get it wrong in some cases, and I don't think we have the culture at the moment where members are routinely invited to things. We segregate things too much, in my view, which I just think is perhaps a bit of tradition that we need to move away from. So just to give some reassurance, this is something that, from my perspective, I want to ensure we tackle. So, those workshops are definitely the start of that. And I think with individual things like procurement, there will be some people who are interested and some people that are not. But it's making sure we've got those open invitations. We did try and do some workshops for members around transformation more broadly, which was to try and respond to feedback about people not really understanding the transformation programme, what it was trying to achieve. Unfortunately, we didn't get a huge amount of take-up for that. I think 6 members said they were interested out of the 69. So, we may have got that wrong in terms of the timing, the location, etc. So we're working on trying to do that. And maybe, actually, as a result of this conversation, transformation is just huge and broad and big, just like procurement actually is, because, a strategic report like this, which was detailed at that level, but actually didn't get into some of that deep down detail. Perhaps we need to start breaking some of these huge topics up into sort of more manageable chunks. So perhaps when we look at the forward agenda, we can think through how, actually, if procurement is something that the panel wants to look at, and, I acknowledge that this hasn't been what you'd hoped for, we maybe kind of bring back each time an element of it which goes into some of those detailed bits, so that we're not trying to cover absolutely everything in one session. So, it's learning for us, and I do very much sense you're frustrated, but certainly from the engagement with members' perspective, that's something we absolutely need to be better. And with procurement, let's make it something that we can bring back the detail each time on certain elements of it, so that you can see in action how some of that transformation is actually happening. And for me, it's also the impact on our outcomes, what we're trying to achieve as an organisation, that we need to make sure we demonstrate. So that was just to sort of say, from my perspective, I hear you loud and clear.
I think I've mentioned this to you before, some of the sessions, the discussions we've had, and one of the key message was, let's go back to the basic. It's about trying to change or reinvent something. Sometimes we lose the message. When you're trying to put this together at a strategic level, you are going to have a handful of individuals who this kind of stuff matters. The rest are simply interested in that particular chunk. And that, all the rest of it is irrelevant. So it's going back to the basic and split it into different sections, what really matters. And the examples I've given over and over again, and other members have as well in the past, is simple. That is, why are we spending huge amount of money going through the bureaucratic process of saying we're going to save value, all the rest of it? But the reality is, are we actually hitting the targets? Or are we just going through the process? Because if we're going through the process, we spend another huge amount. I mean, just example, the transformational partners. What was the cost that we actually pay a huge amount. I'm talking in millions. So that millions is gone out, and we're back to square one again. Is it the process? Are we moving forward, or are we taking 2 steps back? We feel the momentum is movement, but we're not going anywhere. It's almost like trying to go, uphill, but yeah, the conveyor belt's coming down. It's just absurd.
I'm sitting here feeling very, very ancient now, because I worked for Kirklees before I became a councillor, and I sat through many sessions of exactly these discussions, and I don't feel as if we're, apart from possibly managers no longer using red and black notebooks, we don't feel to be moving forward, and I don't know why. I know we're a big organisation, but we seem to be losing it.
Anyone wants to come into that? Any further questions before I just finish on this one? While Jane is still here, can we go through, highlight some of the sections that we can actually come back? I know some have been mentioned, so we can come back and actually keep a tab on this and not kind of break it down to, rather than having the overall strategic view on this. Can we just...
So I think the areas that I'm interested in, this will come as no surprise, it's the benefits, so that benefit tracker, and what sits underneath that in terms of the risks and issues that are associated with that. And I want to see that we are being ambitious, and that's being baked into Eamon's plans. And it's not 6.5 million that we're, if we're recognising that we've over-delivered, we're not taking the foot off the pedal in that respect. I also want to see, in terms of the core objectives, we've got a list of what the societal value objectives are, but what I want to see is that turned into some measures. So these are just words at the moment. How is anybody going to be accountable for showing that they've delivered something? And not all of these will be relevant in all procurement scenarios, will they? But actually, at the moment, there's nothing that gives me any confidence that there's anything that we could actually scrutinise or check to see that they've actually done anything. It needs to be more based in terms of plans, the what's, the how, the whens for me, rather than a nice report that tells me a lot of information but doesn't actually get into the detail.
I certainly want to see more examples. You've got procurement contracts which are going out, which has the legal implications, statutory stuff that we have to do. And I want to see examples as a transparency for the members of the public. They need to be aware exactly what the costs associated. And on that element, how we can actually pool all of it together. Because some of the legal aspect, I'm sure we can collate all of them together rather than looking at individuals. I mean, one example is, if you want to put some banners on, lamppost, somebody has to do a feasibility to see if these banners are actually able to, or the lamppost is able to hold these banners. And the cost associated with that is stupid. So just want to see examples. There are things that we have to do, but when it comes down to it, can we pull it together? The good, the bad. Let's look at in depth as to how we can improve something. John.
Just in different parts of the transformation programme and the digital piece, it's always stuck in my mind an example that was used there, which might give you an idea of what we're talking about. And that was applying for a taxi licence. And I can't remember the exact details, but it was under the old process, you used to have to come in 3 times, come into Flint Street, and there was all this process and costs associated with it. And it was transformed so they only had to come in once and the savings that was delivering was X. Have we got an example for procurement of this is what the process used to be, we've looked at that process, this is what it's like now, and this is how we've transformed it, there's a better outcome, there's cost savings, this is how we've met some of our social value objectives as a result of doing that. So that's a good way to tell the story about, you know, bring to life what it is you're actually doing. So I think that might help.
I mean, there is, it's just been highlighted, social value element. We're looking at that. I think the discussions that you and I have had, David, it's an ongoing thing. It is between the two panels. So can we have that element to come back so we can look at that?
Yeah, I think you're right, Councillor Steve. It is between two panels, so we need to coordinate our efforts about where we report and how we ensure that social value part informs the procurement and supports that. So I'll make sure that happens in terms of the reporting process. Can I just clarify a point that Councillor Taylor has raised about the key principles on the next page? I think you make a good point about these are very general. You're right, absolutely. But these are principles at a lead city region level. Yeah. So what we will be doing locally, working with Kirklees, is to come up with our own social value framework. Yeah, which will be more specific about the measures and how we do that. As you are probably aware, there are a number of tools out there like local multiplier tools which use as the index of multiple deprivation, which is good about inequality. And that framework that comes back will actually have more detail or enable you to actually evaluate progress in a more detailed way. Yeah.
Just to say, if we take the approach that Councillor Taylor's proposed, I actually think that we could really demonstrate all the things that have been raised today by using examples from all different elements of the council, and also taking the point about how we can demonstrate reducing some of that bureaucracy, because that anxiety will be common in relation to any sort of process that implies there'll be more corporate oversight. You can read that into it will take us longer and it will be harder to do, and actually that's not the ambition of doing it this way. And certainly there's some really good examples we've got where having that category overview has enabled us to procure things collectively where previously they'd been done separately, and actually we've got benefits both in relation to value for money but also getting a better outcome for both our population and for the providers that we work with. And I didn't want to overlook the fact that we've been working with our insurance colleagues to make sure that actually we are growing and supporting our voluntary community sector, so that actually we're not putting huge public liability insurance levels on small organisations. And so it's quite far-reaching in relation to how it impacts different elements of the council. And I think telling that as a story through how we've improved those processes is probably the best way of doing that. And then we can use different examples, on a very micro level in terms of purchasing small things through to huge and big expensive contracts. So we'll definitely take that back, and I think we can apply that methodology and that approach to other things we bring into scrutiny, so it moves us away from these strategic wordy documents, which is trying to give you that bigger picture, into actually what we're doing in reality.
Thanks, Rachel. James?
I just wanted to add, I agree with what's been said. I think in terms of examples though, it would be good also to see, talking about how can we show how we've delivered savings and things that have gone well, but I think we also need to see examples of things that perhaps haven't worked as well. And I was going to just say, I think it was in what relationship you were saying, Chair, I think it would be good to see examples where sometimes the what on paper looks to be the cheapest or isn't always the right option. I mean, we've got to do some of the things around health and safety as a responsible council we've got to do. When we're doing procurement, sometimes the cheapest isn't always the best. I mean, look at the national rail franchises, they give it to the cheapest one every time and they go bust in 5 minutes. It isn't that there has to be other considerations that are taken in terms of procurement. So I think, you know, sometimes it is frustrating when someone says, oh, we want to put a new roof on this community building, and the council says, oh, it'll be a 50 grand, and someone else says, oh, surely we could do that for 30. Is that because actually we're looking at a higher level, we want what the work that's done to be better, or we're looking at certain of these factors? So I think we need to bring that to life a little bit as well. I think that would be really helpful.
Any further questions, comments? I'm going to finish off by saying one final thing. When it comes to what James mentioned and John about certain contracts being given out cheapest to the value aspect of it, is procurement or anyone looking into, for example, when a contract goes out, is there any way of, for example, it might not be fulfilled 100%, there might be issues, and do we actually log any of the same issues? For example, you mentioned, John, about licensing, a contract transport going out. Similar ones on that, where there are certain firms that will actually get these transport contracts, but they can't fulfill it because they haven't got enough drivers. They have to pass it on. In some cases, you know, taxis are going in an hour late to pick up kids, so they're not going to school on time, and it's not happening once, it's happening on a regular basis. Is that being monitored? I mean, that's just one example, but is that being monitored, saying that are you actually fulfilling the contract, or is it simply going through the motions? And these companies get this contract again and again and again, and then use other drivers. There are other examples in other areas. So are we, you know, where's the value and where's the money coming in? Are we saying it is cheapest, that's the reason we're giving out? And is that element being monitored? And I think I'd like to see that kind of information on there. And similar to what James said, you know, some companies do get the contract because they're cheapest and they get busted in 5 minutes. So do we go through that, you know, the rigmarole of, are we doing something, or are we just going through the motions?
Okay, so just to clarify, we wouldn't, each procurement, we look at the cost quality element, and so there is a good debate around that. We don't always go for cheapest, sometimes cheapest will be, but value for money is the overriding factor on that whole life costing. Contract managers, I think this is where the new model, and just really to caveat that we're just at the stage of implementation, so we've got lots to do, and that's probably why I hear you loud and clear about the examples, but we're on the journey, but we're just at the beginning as well. So bringing when we've transformed it, what it looks like, we've done some things, but there's much more to come. So I would expect a much closer tie with the contract managers in the services, so we're quality assuring that staff feel skilled to do the contract management, that when it falls into those commercial elements that we start bringing those suppliers in and help out with some of the performance issues if they're reoccurring. So definitely something that we're focusing on.
Jane, everyone, I really appreciate you guys coming, but the thing I differ here is this journey started in 1974. Kirklees has been operating since then. It's not something that we kind of set up the last 12 months. We can rebrand anything in Kirklees, and we can say it's transformational and all the rest of it. It looks great. That's not the reality. The reality is Kirklees was established in 1974. We've got some of the best minds in this council over the years. So we keep using the rebranding and saying this journey has just started. It started years ago. So I refuse to accept that this is just something new. All it means is that we're not using information we've had. But on that note, thank you. Can we have, I think we've got Eamon for agenda item number 5. Take it away, mate.
Thank you very much. So this is a position statement in terms of financial management position of the Council partway through 2018-19. I think when we discussed it previous recent corporate scrutiny panels, I felt it was a good idea to actually have the Council's finances in view more often and to have a collective consideration of what particular areas scrutiny panel would want to have a look at. So I appreciate that this is quite a high-level report as well. Taking on board earlier comments about what level of detail you want in certain reports. So I'll get my apology in advance in terms of the brevity of this one, probably because there is a brief statement at the front which reflects back in terms of the financial outturn position for the Council 2017-18, and I know that was reported extensively at Cabinet and Council in July, and the Q1 2018 monitoring position has also been reported at Cabinet, and those reports are in the public domain, but I could have appended some of the detail for the Q1 report to this. But what I will do is go through briefly, as I'm going through this report, some of the key highlights that are coming out as part of the Q1 review of where we're at in terms of our financial monitoring. But particularly I want to focus for this session as well in terms of early preparation for the budget strategy update report, in terms of some of the guiding principles that are set out in this report, because that basically provides a context for what that report's going to cover. And I think as well, when at the back of the report, when we're looking at what we might want to consider for future work programmes, the next corporate scrutiny panel session is on the back of the budget strategy update report going to Council. So I think that provides a really timely opportunity for a more detailed and in-depth discussion at corporate scrutiny panel around some of the detail of that, acknowledging that while it sets a framework, a financial framework at a point in time, there is opportunity to flex and change it through the remainder of the budget process. It's just setting out some broad assumptions, and some of those assumptions will change. So I think that allows corporate scrutiny panel sort of early consideration of what areas it wants to focus in on. So it's in that spirit that this report's been produced. Just very briefly in terms of the outturn position then, because that's obviously a consideration, as well as current financial monitoring in terms of recurring or key issues we'd need to pick up going forward. So we did report an overall 1.6 million underspend on general fund revenue. We did report that we'd made significant inroads into the planned savings requirement of 54 million, which was quite a significant ask in one financial year. We actually achieved around about 90% of that, and there were other one-off savings as well in year to ensure that overall we came in with a relatively modest surplus. Just to note as well that full council meeting on 11th of July, there was a rollover proposal approved, which is subject to coming back to Cabinet in due course in terms of more detailed proposals around the 1.6 million that's been set aside for public realm activity, place-based activity. So that will come back to Cabinet for more detailed consideration. We did report as well that collection fund performance had held up very well last year, and it's holding up pretty well this year as well. We're reporting currently it's online in terms of current year with our targets. It is early in the year. That's my caution around all of this, that as you'll see as we go through, when it comes to general fund revenue and revenue in general, we are quite prudent and cautious at the start of the year. We tend to get the bad news out early and then bring that back in line towards the back end of the year and through the remainder of the year. Conversely, when it comes to capital, and I know we've picked on it before, I think we're overly optimistic in terms of our capital projections and continue to be, but I'll come back to that in terms of ongoing work that's in the background about how we're going to manage that and look at that differently going forward. So, yeah, the outturn capital spend in 17-18 was significantly lower than the target we'd set. Sometimes there are reasons for that beyond our control, particularly with larger schemes, but I think there's also things we can do as officers to come up with a more realistic multi-year profile as well. So in terms of current year performance, probably the key highlight I have set down in this brief report is around the continuing pressures on high needs, which were dropped in as part of the outturn position last year. So at outturn last year, we reported an underlying pressure of just over 4 million against that budget. That pressure has continued into 18-19 and has actually increased. There are some headline statistics included in here which shows the extent to which some of the underlying trends are increasing. It's not a unique phenomenon to Kirklees around high needs pressure, special educational needs and the national funding position. And I think there is a more concerted view in the sector that these pressures are going to increase going forward. And I've no doubt that as part of this spending review et al, there'll be all sorts of lobbying around this area as well. But we have declared this early as part of the Q1 monitoring position. I'll refer briefly to the Appendix 1 as well, just to cover me back in terms of bits of detail I didn't include in this overview report. So across child protection and family support, we're reporting around about £1 million overspend as at Q1, and that broadly reflects the timing of delivery of savings around external placements, because there's some quite challenging targets in there across not just the current year but the following 2 years as well. So that's acknowledging, I think, the extent to which, while there's been some tremendous and significant improvements around the children's improvement journey, I won't mention journey, sorry, plan, the joint delivery plan with Leeds Council, and there's all sorts of improvements being made. We did set some quite challenging targets around external placements, and they haven't quite materialised. Just going back to the earlier point around, not yet anyway, and that's been sort of picked up. Just going back to the earlier report around procurement, just a quick reminder, because it was in the outturn report as well, that agency spend on children's had peaked at 8 million in 16-17. It had come down to 4 million by the end of 17-18. And there's a further £1 million target saving in the 18-19 children's plan, and that's going to be achieved. And there's a further target of just under £1 million in 19-20 as well. So, and I think the service is confident that that's going to be achieved as well. And that's been done in a very sort of thoughtful and planned way across those years as part of the children's improvement agenda. And procurement colleagues have obviously had a significant input in terms of helping that. So I think that's just acknowledging where there has been a significant success, where you start off with reducing cost against a baseline spend, against a baseline budget that isn't anywhere near what we're spending, and then it comes down to a point where actually we can put in realistic savings, and that's where we're at on that side. So it's probably worth just reminding ourselves where we're at with that one. The learning early support in schools is popping out a 6.4 million variance today in terms of where we're expected to be by year end, and that is pretty much around the high needs pressure. The other more significant areas around commercial, regulatory and operational services. As you might be aware, we lost a regional driver training contract as part of a regional reprocurement exercise, and it's hit that service bottom line by about 400,000, so that's acknowledged in year. And there's also a pressure around schools transport, and quite a lot of that relates to the pressures around special education needs and high needs as well. They're not mutually exclusive, so that is an area that's been looked at extensively as well. So it's not just about learning part of the service, there are knock-on effects to other parts of the organisation. So it's in that context that's been reviewed. So those were perhaps the key highlights in terms of Q1 monitoring. On the capital side for Q1, did put in the report that I think the capital spend assumptions are probably slightly over-optimistic at this point of the year, and we would expect to see more slippage going forward. And again, that's something I'll come back to. Revenue reserves position is also included here. Again, it's quite a high level here, but what it does reflect, and this was part of our financial reserve strategy we set out when we approved the budget plans in February, is that we wanted to stabilise some of the reserves, particularly around financial resilience, to give us a bit of wiggle room and breathing space in terms of resilience and flexibility going forward. And this table pretty much reflects that in terms of our current position, April 2018, and forecast reserves. It says March 2018, it should be March 2019, so that's a typo. And again, that will play out as part of the budget strategy update report, because again, from previous conversations, it's quite a subjective area, and it's obviously something that's been debated quite extensively nationally as well, in terms of council reserves levels, what is a good level of reserves to hold, not hold, financial sustainability of councils, etc. So that will feature quite heavily again in terms of budget strategy update assumptions, and something that corporate scrutiny I would expect would have a lot of interest in and challenge as well. I'll stop at this point. Is there any points of reflection or comments in terms of where we're at before I go on to the next part?
Thank you. Thanks, Eamon. Only a couple of comments from me.
Okay.
On the capital spend, I'm pleased to see you acknowledging that probably that is over-optimistic still.
Yeah.
I suppose the frustration from me is we have these conversations as part of the budget planning round.
Yeah.
We all acknowledge that they're over-ambitious, yet we never change the budget.
Yeah.
And actually, if we'd have put a more realistic, realistic spend profile in the budget, it would have given us a little more wriggle room back in February. So all I would ask is that as we go into the budget round this year, we make sure that we are a bit firmer with our assumptions and our expectations about how that capital spend will play out. Because obviously, if we're not spending as much capital, the cost of raising that capital is lower, and therefore that gives us a little bit of wiggle room in terms of revenue. And I know we tried to do that in the budget, but it wasn't accepted. My other comment on the council tax base growth is absolutely right to recognise that we anticipate that the council tax base will grow during the year. I've had a little worry on this for the last couple of years, in that we seem to take into our forecasts the income growth, but we don't necessarily reflect in the expenditure the necessary service growth to service those additional houses. Yeah. And I'm thinking like bins, for example, where, if you start, at some point we've got to say, actually we need to put more money into that expenditure line, because we can't keep stretching the service further and further with more and more houses being built. So I'd like to see this year that we pick that up. My other comment, and it's a very small one, but just a reminder that as part of the budget planning round this year, we need to do that piece of work on parish councils and the service grant. I can't remember what the wording is, the grant supports, because I know that the one for my parish council is wrong. You're giving us too much money, which I'm sure Graham will want back. But if we pick that up, but overall I think I'm good. The only other comment, and again, I fully accept the numbers in here and the pressures around, as you articulated quite well, in terms of that special need and learning and educational support. But we put more money in the budget, so there's something around, are we able to accurately forecast? There's always going to be a margin, but a couple of million difference in a couple of months seems like we didn't get those forecasts right. So perhaps there's something to look at. Can we as a service try and, if we need to put more money in, we need to put more money in, but let's do it as part of the budget round rather than 3 months later saying, actually, we didn't put enough money in. It just feels too early to be that large adrift in terms of our forecasting. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Can I pick up all of Councillor Taylor's points when we go through the second part, because they're all pertinent? Is that okay? Yeah.
Philip.
A quick question for clarification. And in the revenue introduction here, you've got 16 million planned savings. Does that include the shortfall from the recurring savings that weren't achieved in the transformation, the 54 million that you target, and you were 6 million short of that?
The 16 million reflects what we set out when we approved our budget plans in February. There are elements of that 6 million shortfall from transformation that have rolled through as continuing pressures in 18-19, and they're some of the things that we need to pick up and have a view on as officers to play into the sort of corporate member arenas as to how we're going to manage those, because some of those relate to timing issues around delivery, for example, supporting people contracts, where we did report that it was going to be delayed in terms of reconfiguring those contracts, and some of that has dribbled out into 18-19 as well, but the service is absolutely confident they'll achieve that. In other areas it might be slightly more problematic as to whether the savings are achievable in the first place, and let's be realistic about that and have a look at alternative options. So it's a bit of a mix. One thing I will mention as well is that there have been some early officer budget challenge sessions already through July and August, and they're quite extensive sessions through executive team, which is chief executives, strategic directors, various service directors and heads of service were involved to have a rigorous early review in terms of how you delivering against your existing year savings, what are your pressures, opportunities coming up, and any other issues around investment, looking at capital as well as revenue. So we've got all that in the mix as well. So that's something we did set out to do as part of an early review of the annual budget timetable as well. So some of the issues that you've raised around how much of the non-delivered 17-18 transformation savings have dribbled through have been captured as part of those sessions as well, and we'll take subsequent view as to how to manage those in the budget round.
I'm not quite clear how much of that 16 million includes elements of that.
Right, okay. The 16 million, I would say the 16 million problem doesn't include the 6 million underspend, sorry. I should have got to the point straight away. I always provide context. And that's something we need to pick up, because we did actually offset some of that 6 million by other one-off savings elsewhere. Particularly there was a one-off adult social care grant, an additional government allocation, which plugged the gap. Sorry. Okay. Do you want to go through to the next bit then? I can pick up some of the points that were raised earlier. So the second bit just sets out in broad terms what we'll be picking up or looking at in setting out what is loosely described as a financial planning framework. So it's an annual refresh of our multi-year budget plans, taking into account a whole range of factors, which is, as you'd expect, good practice. But what's set out here in broad terms is what are the sort of cost indicators or cost issues that we take into account, and what are the main funding issues that we take into account in coming to an early set of assumptions that will determine what we think our resource envelope is going forward. And in coming to those early assumptions, is there a budget gap going forward? It's as simple as that. It sounds simple on paper, and probably in reality that's the basis on which we've done budget strategy update reports previously. But there are going to be some changes this time round, which are highlighted in here. And those changes reflect, I think, some of the uncertainties around particularly national funding streams going forward, acknowledging the national context within which local government finance operates. So while we'll be bringing forward a range of assumptions, there will be some sensitivity analysis as well. So we're not just looking at one set of assumptions, we'll be looking at actually this is where we think we're pitching, but it could be slightly better than this based on if we tweak some of these assumptions, and are they realistic assumptions to tweak, or it could potentially be worse than this. So it's getting a sense in terms of where we're pitching our position in the context of the overall budget risk, taking into account national factors, regional and local factors. And that also gives, I think, a useful broad context for consideration of things like reserves requirements as well. And that's not a unique position we're taking. I think it is going to be reflected more and more across councils. But again, I think it's a step change from what you might have been used to previously in terms of budget strategy update reports, but I think it's good practice anyway. And I think as well, we'll also be looking at a longer term financial planning horizon as well, up to 5 years, albeit acknowledging that once you get beyond a certain time frame, you are in the realms of speculation. But I think the other thing that the budget strategy update report will highlight as well is kind of teasing out, in terms of some of the assumptions, our risk appetite as a council, and also our aspiration appetite, and linking some of our assumptions in terms of our council plans and particularly strategies going forward, and having more explicit linkages. And it's how prudent do we want to be, or how bold and brave do we want to be in setting out some of our assumptions, and actually see some of those through. So it's in that kind of context as well. So I'd rather set out the broad context rather than going through line by line in terms of what's being set out in this report. But I don't know if colleagues have any sort of comments or views in terms of the principles that we've set out here.
Philip.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's using different scenarios is a realistic approach to do this, and I'm wondering whether with those scenarios you'd put a probability and a risk factor so it will help guide members in terms of decision making when it comes to full council.
Certainly yes, in terms of why we're assuming certain things, because you could go to certain extremes that are totally unrealistic to make a point. I think where we are tweaking scenarios, there's got to be some bounds of realism in terms of parameters that we will use, and they will be explicitly articulated. I'm not saying that they're not subject to challenge, but it gives you an idea of what those assumptions are. We've got to work within sort of realistic parameters, but there is a whole range of possibilities, I think, is what I'm saying. And that's not a unique experience. I think it's a phenomenon across all councils, so it's how we actually want to approach that without losing sight of the fact that fundamentally we've got to live within our means, deliver a balanced budget and meet the aspirations and our priorities. So we need to have financial planning framework and acknowledge that there are some uncertainties, but yeah, be clear about those assumptions. They will certainly be explicit in there.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few things you've put down in here as indication might be, and I guess it's trying to work out how prudent we are with those, and if they're not, there's a risk about how government policy might change, and certainly come March next year things might go very different.
Absolutely. I'll just give you one brief example of what you just described, and it goes back to picking up some of the issues around council tax base, for example. We've recently reported some quite ambitious plans around housing delivery and growth. So do we take the view that we can be relatively prudent and assume the same levels of growth in more recent years, and that trajectory will carry on regardless of these strategies and plans? Or do we factor in a bolder set of assumptions around council tax-based growth predicated on these strategies and plans coming to fruition, acknowledging that the timing and delivery of these plans is also a factor as well. But that's just one example. Picking up Councillor Taylor's point about acknowledging that if there is net growth in council tax base, the population's increasing, the infrastructure requirements are increasing. I think we did at one time in the budget process actually acknowledge some of those factors, for example, using the example you cited around refuse collection. And that actually came out as part of the budget challenge sessions as well, because in reality what's happened subsequently is that those services are actually by default might have a wider coverage in terms of where they have to deliver that service, but are absorbing that to some extent through looking at more efficient ways of doing that. But there may come a point where that might have to be reviewed. And maybe a step change in terms of acknowledging some of the council tax base growth in terms of some demand factors that we have to build into services as well. So that's definitely been logged as part of the officer discussions and will be looked at and considered in more detail. Take your point on parish grant. That will be looked at. We'll come back to you on that one. Coming back to capital budgets and capital budget review, there is quite a lot of officer work going on in the background at the moment around that, and we have strengthened the officer, I suppose, internal governance and scrutiny around that between ourselves through a corporate capital strategy group, and there's various subgroups feeding into that. And what we're going to set out as part of the budget strategy update report is acknowledging that there's still a lot of work in progress. But I think what we need to have in view earlier is acknowledgement of what is coming forward in terms of broader capital investment needs as well, because picking up one of your earlier points about return on investment in terms of some of the transformation investment, that's particularly true and pertinent around what's loosely referred to as our sufficiency agenda. When you look at some of the demand-led issues, some of that requires more than just a revenue response. It might actually require some significant capital investment as well in the borough to deal with issues such as out-of-borough placement. And those sorts of things need to be in view as well to have a proper, I suppose, strategic consideration as to all those things, how we're going to prioritise those, and if we are going to accommodate those sorts of pressures or needs, how we can stretch the existing plan as a starting point in terms of a more realistic consideration of how it could be profiled to reflect the reality, and then to what extent some of those future plans could be accommodated within an existing overall resource envelope. So that is a challenge we're setting ourselves, effectively. It may or may not be, and then we might have to consider affordability. The budget strategy update report won't necessarily give you the answers, but it will set out these are the things we are going to be considering. So we would expect it to be reshaped and challenged and reviewed by the time we get to annual budget report, certainly. And that's definitely in view. Okay.
Just one question. March 19. It's going to be an interesting time to see what position we're in. Is there anything in relation to the Brexit of how long-term and short-term kind of needs are going to be met, and is there going to be a gap, or is there any been planning? If I'd rather you have just a brief statement on this, possibly at the next meeting, just to understand. And it's not kind of, I think, for all of us to understand exactly what position we're in. From the council point.
Just on that, what's said in here as well in terms of what we'll be producing, there will be a refresh of the corporate risk register, and that will include some of the budget risks as well. And there will be within there a general statement about the potential impacts of Brexit. They will be stated in general terms, And I think what will be evident in terms of some of those potential impacts is that what they are is a catalyst or driver for some of the other things in the corporate risk register in terms of the extent of which they will impact on some of the other things. Be it impact on the general economy, good, bad or otherwise, impacts in terms of capacity, particularly around things like social care, for example, health, and the impact of EU nationals in terms of future demand requirements within those services to sustain those services, and have we got the workforce to be able to do that, and what the knock-on impact will be. So those are just some general examples. It is a difficult area to actually articulate exactly what the impact will be, but again, there's a lot. Obviously, there's oodles of national press, and I think certainly the sector at large is also pushing ministers in terms of consideration of local government impacts. You'll have heard already on national news about places like Kent and Bristol, particular worries or concerns they've got, particularly as port authorities, and some of the sort of logistical impacts that may or may not materialise. So they'll be looking at, as with other areas, potential contingency plans to reflect their particular circumstance. So there will be some commentary on that, and that's something that could be explored further as part of the corporate scrutiny review, for early October. It's been looked at regionally as well. We're in close conversations with policy colleagues as well. So, what is a regional view around that through Leeds City Region, LEPS, local enterprise panels, all those sort of intelligence gathering networks are being considered. But I think it is quite. It is going to be quite broad at this stage because there are so many potentials in terms of what the impact might be, because we don't know what the nature of the deal is going to be yet.
Julie.
Sorry, just as you mentioned the corporate risk register, I just wondered if it's worth looking at the agenda for the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee, which Hilary chairs, because the corporate risk register is going to that, and it might be that you want to do some joint work with that committee on that.
Yeah, sorry, Mike. One of the a number of conversations I've been having with care providers, and one of the biggest issues that they're going to be facing, and there's a big, massive question mark, is the freedom of movement. Some of the workers who currently are in that, in dom care, various sectors, they've no idea. Some have decided to move back to their respective countries. It is a big issue. That's just one. A number of other factors that we have in the council. I think it's useful for all of us to get some understanding, and I certainly don't have an issue if the work Hilary's doing to kind of link it in. And I think rather than duplicating it, we just take it from there. On that note, can I just get the panel to approve on page 24? Eamon's working on. We've got an update on the 11th. I guess, in a nutshell, this is the starter. The main course is going to come further. So can we approve, because this is the work that Eamon's going to be working towards. Yeah? All agree? Thank you. Thanks, Eamon. Cheers. Can we go through onto page 31, look at the work programme for the coming... Sorry, missed you, Graham. Cabinet priorities.
If I'd have sat here and listened to this, I could have gone, no. Thank you, Chair. You've all received the report, and I've all no doubt you've read it. These are priorities for this coming financial year, civic year. I don't think there's probably any surprise in here to anybody. Most of these fairly large pieces of work, and lots of work has already been done on these. Emma's already touched on the budget, so take any question on that if you wish, but I think Eamon's pretty well covered where we are with that and what our thoughts are going forward. I'm just picking up on one thing that I think was going to be really challenging for us, and whilst it's worth talking about at the moment, Brexit, I think until we see any idea of what sort of a deal may be struck with the EU, I think some of that work you might as well stick a finger in the air and guess, because I have no idea. Clearly watching the news every day as I do, nobody else has any idea, so some of that will be a finger in the air and let's take a bit of a sounding, but I think we can do a lot more work once we understand what the offer is, and that will give us an idea of what direction of travel, and it does impact on us. We're not a port, we've not got customs borders, but it does impact on our workforce potentially, and people working in some of our low paid jobs where we know we already have difficulty attracting people. So I think once that deal is done, we can get a bit more of a than doing like that. So fine, I'm happy with the aim to cover the budget, I think. So I think probably as one that exercises most people is the library service. As anybody who's well aware, that last week, on the 21st, we took a report through Cabinet, and that set out a broad set of principles. Since then, we've already had a fairly lengthy meeting and set out a sort of a work stream, a work plan for ourselves going forward. Involved in that is myself, obviously, Sue Richards, Carol Stumpf, the Chief Librarian, people from Corporate Landlord, and Dave Thompson. So we're looking at this in a really broad aspect, hence we've got this broad group of people, and bringing expertise in from Corporate Landlord, which we've not previously had when we did the last review. So that work's continuing, and so we've done a brief timeline of where we're going to go, and we're planning to have meetings once every fortnight to sit down and discuss progress on that. Some of the things will be easier to achieve than the others, shall we say, but we will be making a start on some of the changes rapidly because we have a savings target to deliver, so that work has already started in effect. Cultural offer, I think it's really important to pick up on this as well, because we recognise that if you're going to create a diverse, thriving economy, that a cultural offer is really important to that part. And as you said, I don't think it's mentioned in here because it's probably produced before, we have got the extra money from the business rates pool, just short of 300,000 to develop the music offer. So Kath Davis and her team is working really hard on this, and there's lots of exciting things in the pipeline. We've got further bids. We put another bid in a couple of weeks ago, and we'll learn later on this month, I think September, whether we've been successful in moving forward with that bid. So that's a bid for a significant amount of money. So that's going really, really well, I think. And as I said, we'll aim to have the 2023 music event, if you like. I don't know what we're going to quite call it yet, but there'll be a big event across the whole of Kirklees. One of the things about music is, whilst in some ways it is almost a bit like sport and football, but it's slightly tribal, as people like a specific type of music, we do have a huge range across the authority of diverse music types. And engaging with all those different groups and bringing all those together, I think will be really exciting. And I think there's lots of really good stuff going on, and I think we'll see some real fruits in the next less than 12 months. I think there'll be some real positive action on that. I think it'll be something that we can be proud of, and we will become, I was told, because I said that one of the North's premier music venues and a cultural offer of music, but somebody said, well, I'm a bit ambitious, I should be aiming for the world, but I think we might need a few more years for that. So I'm really pleased about that. I said there's really good work going on that. There's plenty of things to do on that. And obviously transformation is an ongoing project. We've got an interesting piece of work around transformation starting in the very near future, in fact next week, around working with Deloitte on our digital by design offer and our digital services, and that's a very, very short piece of work. It'll only last a matter of months, and we want to tease out, have we got the right digital by design offer? Is it delivering the outcomes we want? Are we delivering the services that people want? Are we delivering the services where they can easily access? So that piece of work will be really exciting, and as I say, it's a very short sprint almost. So A group's been set up to work with Deloitte from across the council. People are invited to attend that group. So they've come from various parts of the council, so bringing a whole wealth and of experience and different take on parts of the council to work with Deloitte. I'm meeting them next week to start that process as well. So that's going to be really exciting. I think that will deliver some really positive outcomes. But I say that is not a long-term piece of work; it's a very short sprint. So I'll take any questions.
John?
Yeah, a couple, Graham, if that's all right. Firstly, on the cultural offering, I agree with you that this is an area where we can be quite ambitious, and Kath and her team are doing a lot of work. And what I'd be interested in seeing coming to scrutiny as soon as it's able is a bit more about the museum strategy, and particularly around Huddersfield, because you know the Tolson Museum has been question marked for I'm not quite sure how long now, but you know at some point we've got to come out with some views and some decisions on it. So really, I think that's something that we would want to try and prioritise. Clearly, in terms of libraries and library service, as that progresses, we'd like to see updates on that. But I'm sure you were expecting that. We've already touched on the budget. I'm interested in the digital by design piece. I'll come back to one of my comments I made earlier about councillor engagement. So have we any councillors involved in that?
So a couple of points with museums. We are already talking museums. We've got some meetings coming up because we're looking at the governance structure of museums for a start. We have to refresh that. It hasn't been done for a number of years. So we're going to do that governance piece of work, and we will then, once it's sort of got that one away, we will be having more conversation around museums. You're absolutely right. But some of the challenges around museums, not whilst out of our hands, are actually involved in other parts of the cabinet's roles. So whether we develop parts of Huddersfield, whether we move museums or whatever we do with it, is tied up in a slightly bigger piece of work that Carl Battersby is looking at the moment, the ideas for around the town centre regeneration. So yes, we are looking at museums. Yes, we are looking at the governance structure and how that we want that to go moving forward. But some of this is predicated on that work that Carl's already doing. Carl's very busy at the moment, so as you'll understand, he's got a lot on his plate, but that work is ongoing. So we will be tied into that longer strategic vision for Huddersfield Town Centre, in effect. Council engagement, you're absolutely right. They will be involved. I had a meeting yesterday to discuss an update around this, and we're going to invite what was the working group on IT transformation, council engagement group, to join in with that. So we're going to get that, and I think who was leading on that? Kathy was leading on that. So we're going to get that group that's already got some experience in digital by design and IT to come and speak to Deloitte. But you're absolutely right, they will be coming along. We may, if you want, we may be able to invite councillors. My own, and this, I'm going back a little bit, if you like, in this proceedings today. We often talk about council engagement, but my fear is we quite often, and I've been involved in loads of these set dates, spend a lot of time organising events and finding dates that we think are suitable, and then nobody turns up. And as Rachel mentioned earlier on, we had a transformation event, which was clearly not understood by lots of members, and we thought it was important to get that message across what it does in a fairly understandable way so that they could understand what we're trying to do. We put 2 events on, and we have 5 wanted to come to one and 1 to the other, and I cancelled them. We will be rerunning them in probably October, towards the end of October. I think we're looking to do that. It may be that we got the times wrong, it may be people are on holiday, but when people have a major piece of work like this they're doing, transformation is hugely important to this organisation. Not just now, transformation I don't think has an end date. We will constantly have to transform as the world changes, and one person signs up, that's a slightly disappointment for me. So whilst I'm quite open to council engagement, I just wonder how much council engagement we will get, but we will endeavour.
It was just to back up what Graham was saying in terms of the Deloitte work, because I've just signed off a paper that will be coming to executive team next week, which explores multiple different ways of getting stakeholders' views more broadly around the Digital by Design programme. So that includes councillors as a key stakeholder in that. So there'll be the group that exists already in terms of bringing them in, but then there'll be an opportunity for any councillor to have comments and views, as it would be for members of the public and staff in terms of what we're trying to achieve with our programme.
Just a personal thing. This is my background, so I'd like to be involved if I can. That's why I used to do it. So I just think there's something I can add.
I've no problem. As I say, we will do it. We will endeavour to engage, but as I say, we spend a lot of time setting up meetings and fitting it into diaries, etc. Because I have to be there at these things, and then nobody turns up, and I feel, is it me, or what? And it's just a bit disappointing. And we really do try and engage. And I've just gone through the pre-library report, and I met with all 23 wards, and I can't tell you how difficult it is to get 23 wards and officers myself all in the same room at the same time. I calculated that I had in excess of 120 provisional appointments cancelled, moved around, so 120 emails just around trying to organise that. So it's really difficult. But I do, from a personal point of view, I like to engage with people. I invite people to engage. We'll be engaging on the next process of the library. But it has to be a bit of a two-way stretch. When you put on an event and one person registers about something so important as transformation, I do start to wonder how much they really want to be engaged sometimes. It does frustrate me somewhat. And that's just my personal opinion. It's frustrating. We went to the trouble, organising an event, and one person registered. That's really a bit disappointing.
Just 2 points. One thing is that we're on the cultural side, and I think Yorkshire's been very popular for the film industry, and I'm hoping that perhaps locally we could encourage more of that industry into Kirklees against some of the other parts of Yorkshire. The other question I have is with respect to the corporate front door bit and digital enabled services. You're extending this. Have you got a sort of a priority list of which services will be added next? That sort of how's that flow going to work?
I'll go back to your film bit first. You may be surprised to know, or not know, that we actually do an awful lot of filming in Kirklees. It's just you don't necessarily recognise it. Oakwell Hall is used an awful lot. You may not, as I say, if you're not familiar with Oakwell Hall, you won't recognise that. And sometimes we do film at Oakwell Hall, and it's, how can I put this? It's kept secret because we sometimes have people there that would attract huge members of the public to look at these superstars. Some of them, I'm not down with the kids, I don't know who they are. But we had an incident at the last big drama series done, Guy Fawkes by the BBC. Part of that was filmed at Oakwell Hall. That was done in secret because the star apparently, and I regret I don't know his name, he's a big star, so we had to keep it quiet because we suspect we would have been mobbed by that. We've done some work for a programme that's on, and Rachel might know more about this because she's got a small child, CBeebies. We've done some filming in Oakwell with CBeebies, and that came to us because, again, it used to attract large audiences where it was filmed, so that was filmed in secret. So there's an awful lot. The Kay Mellor thing about registrars, that was a huge amount of that was filmed in Dewsbury Town Hall. I went to several meetings and sort of wandered across the back of it. So we do an awful lot of filming. We're very proactive in chasing filming, and it's very lucrative, to be honest with you. But you have to be careful how much you do, because if you close Oakwell Hall down, you are closing our premier tourist attraction, 110 acres of country park. So there's a bit of a balance. Yes, we want filming, but we also need to keep that 16th century Civil War home to the public. But we do an awful lot of filming. There's lots of things coming up in the corporate front door.
Can I butt in just quickly?
Yes.
This is actually related to what you've just been saying, but that means that Kirklees has now got an expertise in, contracts and so on for filming and so on. Would that be a good way of generating a little extra income? Because I know that the film people and so on do use other venues, and I have heard of several of those venues having their fingers badly burnt in previously by, oh yes, of course you can come in, and they have had no backup from anywhere else. whereas an agent's fee of a small agent's fee could help that. Just a thought.
That's something worth thinking about. We also got a group of what we call a commercialisation strategy. That's probably something we'll look at through the commercialisation strategy, which we're doing, and I'm involved in that, obviously. So that's something we could possibly look at that. And I'm sorry if people's had their fingers burnt. It's a bit unfortunate, but because these television companies and filmers tend to have lots of money, don't they?
I think there's a lot of filming locations, especially in North Kirklees and South as well. But in the recent several months, you know, the registrar drama and all the rest of it, they were trying to reflect Leeds Town Hall, but that was booked, to what my understanding was, so I ended up using Dewsbury. So we kind of were juggling when we were trying to have meetings as where they were and all the rest of it. So there's a lot that happens, but I think, as Hilary said, that we do need some commercialisation kind of strategy of how we can utilise extra income.
Just for information, the Guy Fawkes thing was I think it's Hartington or Hartington, is it? Who's one of the stars of Game of Thrones, is Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. And he'll be the one that they would have all been turning. All the women would have been going to see him, I think.
Now you mention his name, you're absolutely right. And there's part of an irony in this is Kit Harington apparently is actually related to some of the people in the original Gunpowder Plot, so there's a bit of an irony in the thing. And there's a scene inside one of the things in the hall they used. But that's it, yeah. I wasn't going to go turn and scream at him, but some would have done.
James.
I was just going to say, on the TV stuff, obviously it's potentially lucrative, but I don't know what you're referring to, Philip, but I think one of the things we've talked about in the past, and is not, obviously if you don't know where it is, that doesn't help in terms of promoting necessarily the area. And I think one of the things on BBC, particularly a lot because of all the dramas that they have set in Calderdale, I mean, it's like free publicity, isn't it? Forever mention, I've just been to Sorby Bridge, or I've just been up here. I mean, it's just like continual name dropping of all the locations that they're in or happen to, you know. It's almost as if it's done purposely to promote it. So I don't know how you. I think they're lucky that they've got somebody who writes dramas who happens to be from there and is successful and so on. But I suppose that's what we want to tap into. If we have kind of overt promotion of our kind of best places, that's going to help us. But I suppose it's not easy to achieve.
It's a good point, but it's a bit difficult because most of the Dewsbury ones, for instance, were inside the town hall. It's difficult to sell inside of a town hall, and a lot of the Oakwell ones were inside the hall. But you're right. If you look at what happens up and down the country, is again out of my comfort zone is Paul Dark. But the play, and I was reading an article the other day that the cove where it's filmed has been trying to disencourage people to go, shall we say, because it was full. And they're saying Cornwall's got umpteen miles of coastline. Please don't come here. There's lots of other areas. So you're right. It does have a huge impact. There's a place in a park in Manchester, I forgot now, that was in the film series many years ago, and it still attracts customers coming to look at it, as does the place where Downton Abbey, again now my comfort zone, so huge spike. But when you've got those big exterior shots, it's much easier than when you just got the inside of the 16th century Civil War house owned by the Bat family. How do you market that? But I think it's a valid point. We'll have a discussion about the next commercialisation meeting and see whether we can piggyback some of that on there. But I mean, I suppose the classic example, last week, some wine, but that was outside shots again. If you saw the beautiful rolling moors that we have around here, that's an easy sell rather than inside of Dewsbury Town Hall. No disrespect to Dewsbury Town Hall, but it's not going to attract visitors, is it? Unfortunately.
I think the term "have it, flaunt it" comes to mind. Just want to ask something on the music festival that you mentioned. I mean, can we have this in an annual thing? I mean, if you look at Leeds, it has multiple musical festivals. Leeds Fest recently generates millions. Something in the region of 80,000 people attend over a period of about 3-4 days. And it generates a huge amount. And I'm not talking small amount, I'm talking millions. Not just for the local economy, but local parish council, Thorner Village, and all the rest of them. Is there, considering that we have got huge amount of land, is there any way we can actually make this into going back to this strategy of commercialisation and trying to, how do we regenerate local towns areas? And that's possibly one way. I mean, if you go into Leeds, they've got something new happening on on a monthly basis?
I don't want to say too much, but as I said earlier, that there's some exciting plans in line, and we are looking at a fairly large venue that we could use outside, and we were hoping to have had an event this year at this site, but unfortunately, for reasons beyond our control, like the band suddenly became a bit more popular, the price went up. It wasn't possible. But we have a site in mind, and we are looking to try and do something next year. As I said, the plans for this year got blown, of course. But we do an awful lot of music in Kirklees. We had Hoods Fest at the weekend down at the Stores Hall campus. We've got the Marsden Jazz Festival, which is quite well renowned. Again, jazz is not my thing. We have Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival, which is the world leader in contemporary music. Radio 4 and all the, you can't get a hotel in Huddersfield that attracts huge amounts of people, and that's, as I say, world leader. The Cleckheaton Folk Festival, we had a reggae festival in Fartown, we had various other bits and pieces over this summer. We had, dare I mention, Little Mix sold out the stadium. So there's a huge diverse musical offering in Kirklees. It's just that in Leeds you see it in one place in Leeds. Ours are spread out across the area. We've got lots going on in music, and it's really diverse, and that's the challenge, is to make that even more diverse and use some more of our venues, which is part of the programme we've got coming up. But we have a real diverse offer, and I think we do really well. So I'm really pleased at how it's developing. And as I say, it's all over. We have a big area, and it's everywhere, and it's going on in small venues, big venues. We're talking to various promoters in Huddersfield at the moment with, about looking at how we can do more. We've got a hookup with Leeds. We're developing a relationship with Leeds as well, how we can get more people here. But we are really working hard, and you will see some real improvements in the next few years. But we already have a really good, positive offer.
Thank you for that. Can we just go back to corporate front door and look at the programme you have of bringing more services online?
I think Rachel wants to say something first, and I'll come in.
What we've got, I think, with the corporate front door and the various processes, we've got a huge spreadsheet of all the different processes that we know would be ripe for looking at for digital by design. What this piece of work that Graham mentioned in terms of this short-term piece of work is to put a sense of prioritisation into that list, so that we can actually look at, because sometimes if you look at end-to-end processes in isolation, the risk is that you then create potentially a problem elsewhere, and actually what this piece of work will do is help to understand how those should be prioritised and addressed to get the maximum benefit, and to make sure that we're not creating any untoward implications. So what we'll do is we'll bring that back in terms of it being able to see what that piece of work is over what timescales.
And following up from Rich said, if you get the chance to go down to where our digital people hang out, they have a wall and it's just full of stickers, and the amount of work they're doing is huge. And I sometimes think, well, that's really, I like ambition, but that looks really difficult. But with some other interesting things coming up, and I don't want to mention one thing, that we have one interesting thing that we're actually working on at the moment that I was talking to officers about a couple of weeks ago. And I think it's a bit early to announce this yet. We'll pick this up next time we come and talk about digital. But we have an exciting potential to deal with, to hook up with some major IT people within the country, shall we say. And I think, I don't want to say any more, but there is something what I believe, and I might be wrong, but I believe will be a real exciting project that we're working on. But it is very early days yet. And it is about prioritising it, because they're great at coming up with ideas, and it's just really difficult to fit everything in, because there's loads of trouble with IT is like anything, it moves so quick these days. You need to be careful that you're not doing something now that'll be outdated in 6 months. So I think getting Deloitte into focus down a bit on what our priorities should be, and put them in a probably more ordered timeline than we've got now, because every cabinet member says to the digital by design team, "Oh, can you do this for me? Can you do that for me?" And they'll go, "Yeah, we'll try." So perhaps might be a bit thinly spread at the moment. I don't know, but we have got some. As I say, we've got one really interesting project coming up. The citizens' account. We set a target of signing up so X number of people, and it's just gone really, really well. We've exceeded all the targets we set for ourselves, and they were really ambitious targets. And that's gone really well, and that continues to grow. We add things to that constantly all the time, so that will become more and more a bigger platform as we roll things out. And one of the other things is around IT is when you come up with an idea, you think, well, how can I use that? And you go, well, okay, and they can do that. And then you think, well, actually, we can do this. It's a never-ending feast because there's always more you can do. And it's just how you fit that into the work problem. Because it's all right me saying to them, I've had this idea, can you do this? You go, yeah, great, we'll have a look at it. But that blows them off course on something else, perhaps. So we need to be careful, and I think this work with Deloitte will help us just focus down and make sure we're not just trying to do loads of things all at once, and we've got a proper, slightly more accurate timeline. Because they will crack on with anything, but you need to be very careful, because what I think is a good idea might not necessarily relate to what the public want. That's what we're trying to focus on. What are we delivering for the public? Because it has to be customer focused, it has to be resident focused, and we have to deliver what they need. Okay.
Final question, yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to pick up on that, Councillor Turner. I think there's a danger with IT, the digital front door, and whatever, of further marginalising people who are already marginalised, particularly older people. And I have had residents within my ward have had problems with, there isn't always a telephone number put forward, because I understand why, it's because we want to put things digital, because it's cheap, we don't have to pay people to answer phones, etc. But we are building up some marginalisation there which is unnecessary and which we ought to be able to avoid, we ought to be acting to avoid. Comments?
There will be people marginalised by that, I get that, but, and there is a but here from me, it's not there is a but I don't think the marginalisation is as great as everybody thinks. We must be aware of it, we must keep an eye on it, you're absolutely right. But if you look at the latest figures, in excess of 86% of the population have now got a smartphone. And people constantly are on TV and in newspapers talking about, young people, all they ever do is look at the screens, and it's young people. It's a load of rubbish, it's absolutely everybody. I'm involved in a charity in my own ward, and we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we decided, well, when we're going to have the next meeting, and this is a group of retired men who every single one of them got out a smartphone to decide when the next meeting was. There are people marginalised, I totally get that, we take that on board, but there's less and less. The growth of digital technology, smartphones and apps is really widespread. But you're right, there are some people who are marginalised, and we will do all we can to make sure we don't marginalise more people, but the growth of technology is here, we have to embrace it, but make sure we don't leave anybody behind. I get that, but we must embrace it, we must move forward. If we don't, we as an organisation, we as a country, we as individuals will get left behind. It marches on at a pace, and we can't just because it's there. We must use it because, as I said, we will get left behind. But we won't leave anybody behind. They can always ring the switchboard, and you're right. We don't want messing people to phones because some people, some people can't use a phone. So we're marginalising people when we went to the telephone. So I accept there's always a small group of marginalised people, but we will endeavour all the time to make sure that that group is as small as possible and is looked after as best we possibly can. But we have to accept technology is here to stay. The world has changed. It will have changed next week. It will change the week after. And this is one of the conversations I have when we talk about digital by design and try and guess what the next big thing is. And I keep saying, if I could guess what the next big thing is, I wouldn't be here. I'd be sat in a hot yacht in the Bahamas, wouldn't I? That's the difficult thing, because it changes constantly. Trying to second guess the next thing is really difficult. But we do try, and as I said, we won't leave anybody behind. We will just have slightly different things in place for them.
Graham, Rachel, Hilary.
Can I just thank Graham for the fact that he's recognising there's the need for support, but I hope you realise that support could be the person with the fantastic phone who has nothing in the bank to be able to pay their bill. So, we've got to watch out for people who need the extra support, and as long as we write that into what we're doing, we've got a chance of addressing the whole community.
Thank you, Hilary. Guys, thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Can we move on to the last two items? 7 work programme, page 31 to 38. You've all seen, is everything in order? As I always say, we've got the liberty and prerogative to take and add things in. But as of now, the next one is going to be library reviews. That's the follow-up from all the sessions. And I'm assuming, Hilary, John, you've had individual sessions? Okay. Right. But we've got the second bite of the cherry on this one. Excellent. And future meeting dates on page... Oh. Item 11. Yep. Thank you for coming. Thanks, guys. I officially close the meeting. Thanks.